To expand on this, I'm joined now by criminal justice expert Dr. Siyanda Dlamini to discuss this very worrying trend. A very good evening to you, Dr. Dlamini. Thank you for your time. I mean, you heard the president saying that government is going to be looking for ways to beef up security. What do you make of that response?
Thank you very much. Good evening to you too, and good evening to your viewers. I think that there are more than ways that this can play out. Like, firstly, we need to understand that there are many factors that are contributing to this, and some of these factors, I think that 50% of them, they relate to gang-related. They are gang-related, and you have them. Another percentage that is about 45% as retaliation. But the trend that we have been seeing now is about extortion. What I can say is that, in my own personal experience, is that we have to look at we look at where these crimes are taking place. Are they taking place in a rural setting? Are they taking place in an informal settlement? Then we can talk about beefing up security, because we need to be more proactive than reactive in this nature. How do we do that then? We have to make sure that the communities themselves, they play a vital role in curbing crime in our societies. So I think that the president, as he was saying, that we've been hearing that from time to time, but there has been no action from the government to actually work together with the communities. He mentioned the CPFs. The CPFs, it's another story when we talk about the CPFs, because the CPFs themselves within the township communities, rural communities, is a problem on its own. So I think that there is a lot that needs to actually being worked out between the government, especially with the law enforcement agencies, to work with the communities.
Is this form of violent crime becoming a norm now?
When we look at it, it is becoming a norm. Hence, I always say that if we're looking at this particular crime, we have to ask ourselves, what is a motive behind this? And if you're looking at it, it's more of the officials started saying that, no, it's a gang-related, and then now it's extortion. But moreover, I would like to actually put forward a deliberation per se, as to say, if we have people who are supposed to be protecting the community, especially in our case in South Africa, that will be the South African Police Services. If we were to say we find some of them being involved in criminal activities, what is it then the community can resort to? That's the question that we need to first answer, because the moment that the SAPS and the government can accept that sometimes they have their own members being part of a much broader syndicate that operates within the society, especially if you look at what is happening in the Western Cape per se. These crimes, they take place in a what? They take place in a much more informal settlements, and they take place in townships. So we need to actually really understand why this is happening.
I suppose there's also questions now that should be asked about the level of gun violence and gun exposure, because, some are now beginning to liken South Africa to the U.S., saying South Africa is looking down the barrel of a gun, which points to a very disturbing trend.
Indeed. I'd say that the gun control per se needs to be tightened again. I have to commend when it comes to the government, when it comes to the laws, when it comes to guns regulation. Yes, they are making much effort there. However, most of the guns that are used in these crimes, you'd find that they are illegal, they have been stolen. So you'd find that I think society per se needs to be cautious, and everyone who owns a gun, they need to be cautious about the level of these criminals, how they want these clean guns. So that is why we call it a concealed weapon if it's for personal use. So people need to be very careful when it comes to such things. And I think there's more that needs to be done by the government when it comes to gun control.
Perhaps, Dr. Dlamini, let's expand a little bit on some of the reasons that have been cited, the motives behind the mass shootings. You emphasize retaliation and extortion as accounting for the larger part, well, perhaps half of the reasons why. What form of retaliation and extortion are we speaking about here?
If you're looking at how these things are, or these crimes per se are happening, you'd find that they first start as a form of a gang violence. And then the other gangs, especially in the Western Cape, will retaliate in terms of their masses. And then you'd find that sometimes if you look and recently on what is happening, you look at the people that are being attacked. More often now you find that you have people or our African foreign brothers that have been attacked. They are places of businesses. Then that tells you that there needs to be a very much intelligence-led policing rather than just having a hearsay on what is happening on the ground. And I believe that the government per se, especially the SAPS, have been mentioning this from years now, that we're going to beef up security, we're going to hire more police. But does that help if there is a lack of trust between the communities and the law enforcement agencies? In this case, that will be the SAPS.
Mm-hmm. You've already mentioned or perhaps spoken to some of the challenges, saying that perhaps, as Police Minister Begitela likes to call it, some rotten apples in the system, referring to police officers as a problem. But what are the other pressing challenges that speak to this growing trend?
I think that it's much more of different factors that are within our societies, especially the lower class in our country per se. But we cannot just pick one and say this is the major one or the one factor that contributes to this. But I think that we need to know that it's a multifaceted culture that is kind of happening here. And also, we have to pay attention to how can we break the status quo that is currently happening. That is where we have to look into how do we strengthen the relationship between the law enforcement agencies in our country and the communities that we are having on the ground. Because communities, you'd find, in more often than not, they will resort to taking the matters into their own hands while trying to get back their community or moving on with their lives. So we really, really need to think carefully about where we go from here, especially if we need to learn from what is currently happening in the Western Cape.
The police to residents ratio has also been cited as a major factor when it comes to the sort of intelligence-led policing you were making reference to, that perhaps there simply aren't enough officers on the ground or at the police stations.
Yes, there will never be enough police officers, ma'am. But there needs to be, hence I'm saying there needs to be that, what I like to coin a smart policing and intelligence-led. That is where you have to make sure as a law enforcement agency that you gain the trust and breaking the boundaries that were there before, and knowing that we have to bring back that trust, that community can actually trust the police. Then now, if the police cannot protect the very own people or community members that have information regarding the perpetrators, then no one is going to come forward and say, no, I have information regarding to what has happened. we need to make sure that there is that viability of bringing trust between the community and the police.
Very well. Let me thank you for your time, Dr. Siyanda Dlamini, criminal justice expert there, discussing the worrying trends of mass shootings becoming a norm in South Africa. Very disturbing.